Hello AS, welcome to your next mark scheme video. We're going to whiz through this one really quickly because I know you've worked hard on answering the questions. You must make sure you've answered the questions before you look at the mark scheme because you want to be marking your true and honest seeing your true and honest ability. And it can be quite obvious if students have watched the video and then answered the questions because the wording is very similar, or because of just the way that the mark scheme isn't necessarily the way students answer the questions. So just be careful of that. Okay. First one, identify the sampling technique and outline used in this study. So you know that really important phrase, in this study, and then outline one weakness of using this sampling method. So this is AO1 and AO3, identify and evaluate, and it says in this study, so there is a bit of application, so it does look at all three of the skills. This one you get 1 mark for correctly identifying the sampling method. Because it mentions an advert, it is volunteer sampling. And then 2 marks for evaluation. So just say AO3 only there. However, I would be really tempted, so on the mark scheme you don't need to apply to get the marks. However, I'd be tempted for 2 reasons to contextualise. So link back to the stimulus, use the words from the stimulus, and I'd like to see everybody who has given themselves full marks to underline or a word from that they've used from the stimulus, or if they haven't used a word, make a note to remember to do it, because it's really good habit to get into. It doesn't lose you any marks, just in this case it doesn't gain you any either. So you'd say a weakness is, this is a weakness because. So a weakness is the sample may be biased, as only a certain type of person may read the newspaper that the person's advertised in. So think about that continuum we've looked at in class. And then this is a weakness as it means that the sample will not be representative, reducing the population validity, making it difficult to generalise the results of the study. And then I forgot to do this, you need to include that, or ideally you want to include this, to the target population. So the sample is not representative because it's biased, reducing the population validity, making it difficult to generalise the results. And you could talk about volunteer bias here. Next one, write a non-directional hypothesis. This is question 2. You get 1 mark for making it non-directional, so saying there is a difference between, and 1 mark for operationalising. So there's a difference between birth order, open brackets, because you must mention both conditions to get the IV to get the marks, first or subsequent, so whether you're first in the birth order or if you're after the first, and then career choice, artist or lawyer, and that is how we're measuring career choice. So in this case it's not numerical, which is quite unusual. However, you can talk about that, and if you're in the second year we'll talk about how that is nominal data. So nominal data means placing people into categories. If you're thinking about the second year, you can have a look at nominal, ordinal and interval level data, but that's not too important for now if you don't want to. This is an extension, so if you've done that, you've got full marks and you're happy, don't panic. However, just be aware that you can also say there is an association. So we're not looking for a relationship, but we are looking for an association between birth order and choice of career. And just bear in mind, directional hypothesis is not credit-worthy, and a reference to a relationship or not credit-worthy either. If you got full marks using the slide before, don't worry about, and you're a bit confused by this, don't worry too much. It's just a little bit of additional information if you are going for the higher marks. So they did say, so although technically the psychologist is looking for an association, the candidates can gain credit for expressing in terms of a difference. So technically with that one you could have talked about there'll be an association between birth order and choice of career, not relationship. However, if you mention difference, because that's all I've taught you, that is not a problem. Just to be aware, that is an alternative type. You get 2 marks for a clear hypothesis and 1 mark for a hypothesis which lacks clarity, which means that you didn't operationalise. So you didn't mention birth order, first or subsequent, and you didn't say career choice, artist or lawyer. So you may have only been stuck with that one. Hopefully not, because we've gone over that loads now. So please just keep that in your memory. Identify an appropriate sampling method for this study and explain how the psychologist might have obtained such a sample. For this study, in this study, so it is linked to the study. So this is AO1 and AO2. You must describe and you must apply. So what I'd like you to do, and I'm looking for everybody to do this, I'd like you to go through your answer and highlight or underline any words where you have linked the answer to the stimulus. So 1 mark for naming an appropriate sample, and 1 mark for explaining how they'd carried it out, a 3rd mark for ensuring it's contextualised. However, bear in mind, if you don't contextualise, you don't get any marks. So 1 mark for naming it, 1 mark for explaining how you'd carry it out. If you haven't contextualised, you don't get either of those marks. So chances are you've either got 0 or you've got 2, possibly. Because it says in this study. That is how important it is. So you could identify sampling volunteer sampling, that would get you 1 mark. By advertising for lawyers and artists, that will get you 2nd because you've contextualised. And somewhere they might be interested, such as a law or art journal or newsletter. So you've identified it, you've explained how you do it, and you contextualise it. Opportunity sampling, invite whoever is available at the time, so that's telling me what an opportunity is, from law firms on Mansfield High Street and artists from a local art and craft fair, so you've contextualised it as well. Random, get a list of lawyers and artists in the Mansfield area and get a computer to randomly generate the number of names needed for the sample. Same with systematic, get a list of all the lawyers and the artists in Mansfield area and then select an nth term and select every 7th person from that list. So you must have mentioned, I've obviously chosen Mansfield because that's where we are, but you must have mentioned lawyers and artists specifically, so can you underline where you've done that? And then stratified, get a list of all lawyers and artists in the Mansfield area, identify the strata and work out the proportions needed. For example, 47% female, and select at random from that strata the appropriate number for your sample. So you've mentioned about lawyer and artist and you've told me how to do it. If I were you, I would be tempted to go for random or systematic, because they're quite complex, they're easy enough, very easy to show enough information to get the two marks as long as you contextualise, but they're not as complex to explain as stratified. Stratified's a really complicated one. The researcher used volunteers for this study. Outline one disadvantage of using volunteers to take part in this study. AO2 and AO3. If you haven't contextualised, you must make a note of it on your sheet, and you can't get any marks for it. 1 mark for evaluation, 1 mark for evaluation in context. So example I've given here, a weakness is that volunteer samples are usually biased as a certain type of person volunteers. That's 1 mark for evaluation. In this study, the participants who volunteered might want the therapy to work to reduce their anger and therefore were as helpful as possible, skewing the results. So because they want to be, they're interested, they're passionate about it, then you'll find them more helpful. So you could experience demand characteristics, good participant effect, any of those things. It doesn't matter if that's not the evaluation point you've used. You could use another one. What you must have done is evaluated it, and you must have put it into the context. Okay, explain how the researcher could allocate the volunteers randomly to conditions of the experiment. So you get 1 mark for each one of the points up to a maximum of 3. So there's only 2 points, but if you mention all of these, you will get all of the marks. If you only mention 1, you only get 1. So an equal number of A's and B's could be placed in a hat. That would be 1 mark if you've mentioned that. And then the participants select them. That would be the 2nd. Then the 3rd mark you must mention. So this is the 2nd or the 3rd time you have done this question for me. If they picked out an A, that should say, if they picked out an A, it would mean they were in therapy A. If they picked a B, they were in therapy B. So you've contextualised by talking about that. So equal number of A's and B's in the hat, participants would select them, and if they picked it out, they would mean they're in therapy A, if it was an A, and if they picked out B, they were in therapy B. And finally, write a suitable hypothesis. So 1 mark for the hypothesis. You can have either directional or non-directional. It's up to you. And then 1 mark for operationalising the IV, mentioning therapy A and therapy B, and 1 mark for operationalising the DV, the reduction in anger scores of offenders measured using self-report questionnaires. So it's the reduction in anger scores. It's the difference between the 1st and the 2nd anger score. There is a difference in the reduction in anger scores of offenders who complete therapy A and those who complete therapy B. Or there will be a bigger reduction in therapy A's anger scores than therapy B's anger scores as well. You could also have there will be no difference in the reduction of anger scores of offenders who complete therapy A and those who complete therapy B, so you could have a null hypothesis as well. Please make sure you've done the following things: marked it in written them without checking the mark scheme first, written it in a different colour, given yourself a mark. If it is not full marks, you must tell me why. That's not for me. I could read it myself and tell you I know the mark scheme. That is for you. I want to make sure you know why you didn't get full marks, because in the exam you can access full marks. And then finally give yourselves a total score. You've done these 3 or 4 times now. I'm expecting everybody to know exactly what they've got to do. I've got lots of people who are doing it right first time, which is brilliant. A couple of you haven't quite managed to previously. From now on, because I made it so clear, I want you to do exactly what I have asked. So write the answers, mark them, tell me why you didn't get full marks, give yourself a total score. Okay, thank you very much.